All right. I think we'll go ahead and begin. So just a reminder, just some of the things I went over yesterday. We do have the Q&A chat for your use for questions that you may have during the presentation that we will be answering at the end of the presentation. And then we also ask you to remain muted for the entire training, just to make sure that there's no background noise and potential interruptions for the presenters. And then also during today's 15-minute break, there will be a poll, evaluation poll that you can take. Take a couple minutes, would be appreciated if you did it. So just a reminder on that will be happening at the 15-minute break. And with that, I think we can go ahead and begin, and we will have Megan Van Alstyne presenting on the Relocation Assistance Program section. So Megan, take it away.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Go ahead and share my presentation here. My name is Megan Van Alstyne. I work for Caltrans at headquarters under our project delivery team. I do a smattering of things, including relocation assistance and federal land transfers, along with a few other items. We'll just go ahead and jump into our presentation here. Everybody can see the presentation okay?
Yes.
So, great, thank you. So when we're talking about off the state highway system, which I think many of you who are attending this do, it refers to the LAPM Chapter 13. But as you go through Chapter 13, you'll see that there are a ton of references to Chapter 10 of the right-of-way manual. So really the meat and potatoes of relocation, the Relocation Assistance Program guidance is going to come from Chapter 10 of the right-of-way manual. And that is really because RAP is very driven by federal laws, guidance, and all of that is mirrored under our state law. So it's very, again, very heavy in terms of specific timelines that are required through our federal guidelines, specifically the Uniform Act, and very heavily reflected under Government Code, California Code of Regulations 6000 and related, as well as other California regulations. So if you're starting to really dive into the relocation program, you're going to want to spend a lot of time digging through Chapter 10, or again, find an expert that really already knows that and can help you. Because again, there's not a lot of wiggle room or leeway in terms of how the documents are delivered to our displacees, what the timelines look like. There's a lot of oversight as well at that federal level when it comes to especially our residential relocations. So what is the purpose of RAP? The purpose is to treat our displacees fairly, equitably, and consistently. We want to make sure that there is no disproportionate injury, right? So least private injury for the most public good, right? That tends to be our purpose throughout many of our activities that relate to the public. And that can vary a little bit depending on what kind of relocation you're doing. The types of relocation typically fall into our residential, which can be our owners, tenants, or mobile home, which are a little bit of both, and our non-residential. Okay, move on to the next slide here. So, what is a displacement? Displacements are any person, household, business, farm, or nonprofit organization that is displaced by a public project who may be entitled to relocation benefits. So, I think that's pretty clear. If you have a project coming through and it's going through someone's house or going through someone's business, that is considered a displacement. A displaced person or displacee is going to be a person who is moving his or her personal property from the real property, right? So the real property is going to be taken care of by our acquisition team. All of the personal property is going to be taken care of by the RAP team or RAP agent. And there are, of course, ways in which our displacees are going to qualify to be a displacee. And I think we get into that a little bit more, let's see, in the next slide. But, you know, they have to be in place at the time that the initiation of negotiations is given, you know, or at the time that a written notice of intent to acquire has been given to either to the owner of the site, right? So if it's an owner, they of course would receive the ION, the initiation of negotiations in person, or that notice of intent to acquire. If it's a tenant, they have to be in place at the time that the owner receives those notices. And with RAP, again, very timeline, deadline driven. Those notices should be given to the owners at the time that the acquisition agent goes out to give them their first written offer. If we're talking about tenants, that's supposed to happen within 14 days of that first written offer. And that is required under the Uniform Act, right? So this is not something that Caltrans has come up with. It actually is under the Uniform Act. If you happen to have people that come up to you, let's say during the environmental phase, and they say, hey, it seems like you may be affecting my house or my business. The most important thing to tell them is, hey, in order to qualify for the relocation program, you do have to be in the property at the time of that first written offer. So especially when we're talking about tenants, you know, tenants can be scared away pretty easily. They think that they're just going to kind of get kicked out, and they may move of their own volition, which often doesn't help the agency because, of course, if it's a tenant situation, that landlord will move new people in, right? So no matter what, for the agency that's having to move them, you're going to end up having to kind of move someone. But we, you know, again, hate to have tenants lose out on benefits because they don't understand that they have to be in the property at the time of that first written offer. For those who are considered to be not displaced, in order to qualify, it does have to be someone who is a legal resident of the United States. If they are not a legal resident, unfortunately, they do not qualify for benefits. Then they must be in residence at the time that the notice of intent to acquire has been given or the written initiation of negotiations. They cannot have moved into the subject property after the property was acquired by the LPA. So sometimes, you know, you may decide that you want to rent the property out after acquiring it, you know, in case there's, you know, maybe a gap between your right-of-way phase and your construction phase. When you do that, those tenants that you move in, they are not qualified for relocation. So, you know, that can be, again, helpful. They cannot occupy the site for the sole purpose of obtaining benefits. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prove when somebody has done this. But, you know, if that's something that you do find, again, if they're occupying it solely for the purpose of benefits, you would not be required to provide them with relocation. Squatters are typically not going to be covered. It used to be that if somebody was being relocated temporarily, they did not qualify as a displacee. That has changed under the most recent updates of the Uniform Relocation Act. And so our temporary displacements have gotten, I would say, more complicated, and you'll want to make sure that you're referring both to Chapter 10 of the Right-of-Way Manual as well as the Uniform Act and how to deal with persons that are temporarily displaced. The timeline for what qualifies as a temporary displacement also has been tightened under that Uniform Act. It is, if you are relocating someone temporarily for more than 12 months, that is considered to be a permanent displacement. So, which is a little different than how it used to be considered. So keep that in mind too. You may think, oh, this is just temporary, it's no big deal. They don't get wrapped. That's probably not true. So make sure again that you're referring to Chapter 10 and the Uniform Act and your experts if you have any experts that you're contracting with or that are on staff. Okay, so some other things to keep in mind when we're talking about residential, the length of occupancy is important. With all of our residential, we're looking at if they've been in residence for 90 days or more. If they have been in residence for less than 90 days, they're still entitled to move benefits, but a lot of the housing related benefits they will not get, right? So part of our job is to determine what relocation funds they need in order to close the gap between what we're offering in acquisition and what it actually costs them in order to relocate to a new, single family residence or into a new rental property, right? So again, this can get a little complicated. It's part of doing that relocation housing valuation and making sure again that people have enough funds in order to relocate. So very important, and a good idea to again make sure that you're referring to your experts and to all of our guidance in doing that. Part of relocating our tenants is also going to be finding housing that is decent, safe, and sanitary. So again, when it comes to people that we're relocating off of, let's say, our freeways, sometimes that housing is not in the best condition, and we're not taking someone from kind of a shack that they might be living in and then putting them back into a shack. We are having to find something that is decent, safe, and sanitary, meaning that, it's up to building code. It has working bathrooms and kitchens and is 2 people per room, right? And there's a checklist that is part of our Chapter 10 that you're able to use when you're determining if something is decent, safe, and sanitary. But again, that's part of determining what relocation housing funds are needed. So in the acquisition, you may not be paying for something that is decent, safe, and sanitary because that housing that you're acquiring may not be, but what we're relocating them to must be. So again, for that gap, there can be substantial funds that are given to our displacees in California in order to help them to do that relocation. When it comes to businesses, if they are doing business on site at the day of that initiation of negotiations or first written offer, they are considered, they get full benefits. There is not that 90-day requirement for businesses. So a little bit easier when it comes to businesses in that sense. But there is that distinction between our residential and our non-residential that's very important to keep in mind. All of our displacees are going to be entitled to some level of advisory services. It's very important that our RAP agent sits down with our displacees and gets an idea of what their needs are. If it's residential, it may be items like, do they take public transportation? Is that one of the reasons that they live where they are? Are they hopping on the bus to get to work? Are they close to a particular school for their children? Where do they work? So based on where they're being relocated to, is that going to affect how they get to work? With our non-residential displacees, we want to get an idea of what their actual business is, how big it is, how many employees, if there are timelines for production that we need to be aware of when we're relocating them, so we know if we need to do things like time the move to allow them to continue producing, items like that. And once we kind of have an idea of what our displacee actually needs, then we're actually able to better provide advisory services. So you'll see that here under B, it says specific advisory services. And that is because our displacees are not created the same. And you will find that different displacees have different needs. Residential displacee that has a disability, again, may need a little more work, may have different needs that you're going to help them to meet in their housing than someone without a disability, for example. A very large business that operates 24 hours a day will be very different from, let's say, like a tax preparer office that kind of works that more or less typical Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. See. Everyone is entitled to moving costs. And again, that's no matter the length of your residency, no matter what your business is. If you're on site at the time of that first written offer, you'll get some form of moving costs. And again, that can be a little complicated on what is provided based on residential or non-residential. So you'll want to make sure you're leaning heavily on the tools that you have to determine that. But it kind of largely breaks down into some kind of fixed moving costs, and that's calculated differently for our residential versus non-residential, or again, going out and kind of getting bids to determine what it's going to cost. For our residential, of course, that move cost is usually pretty low and kind of controlled, unless they have some kind of crazy setup. For example, under the federal video that talks about relocation, you'll see that they have a enthusiast who actually has a train enthusiast who has a whole train car, in their yard. So if you come across a situation like that, your move cost could be pretty interesting, and could be pretty challenging. But in general, residential move is not too difficult. But when we get into our non-residential, we have an unlimited pot of money in order to actually help them move their site, right? So, and these are things that are specific to moving the machinery, but the installation is whatever it takes. It is what is actual, reasonable, and necessary to move that business from the displacement over to that replacement. So again, can get very complicated depending on what kind of business you're looking at, what they're producing, and what kind of machinery they have. But we spend whatever it takes to move them from point A to point B. Where we get to a little bit of a sticking point is, again, RAP is personal property or personalty. We are not real property. So anything that is real property related, not anything, most things that are real property related are going to be completely off the table in terms of what money we can spend as RAP agents, right? We can do a little bit in order to accommodate the real property, to have a very heavy piece of machinery sit in a new warehouse, for example, or to kind of widen doorways in order to bring in large pieces of equipment. But other than that, we're going through what's called our reestablishment pot of money. And that caps out at $33,200, which is much better than what it used to be. It used to be capped at 25,000, so that increase is good, but is fairly limited. And even under our reestablishment pot of money, there are limitations to what we can do to that real property in order to kind of help our displacees. So again, it can get fairly complicated on what we're able to modify for our displacees to help out and what we cannot. And so really important to make sure that you have someone who has experience, especially with complicated non-residential, and can walk through the process with them. Okay. Oh, sorry guys. I think I just I missed changing the slide. So everything we talked about is related to this slide. Again, we want to know the number of days that our residential displacees have been on site. When it comes to what help we put in for our owner occupants in terms of their mortgage and items like that, they need to have their mortgage for 180 days. The length of occupation, their status as a U.S. resident is very important. There actually is a self-certification that they must fill out that's related to that U.S. residency. And we'll talk about that a little more in the next slide. And then the services that they're going to be entitled to, again, are advisory services, those specific advisory services, moving costs. And for our residential, non-residential, they get that replacement housing payment. For our non-residential, they're going to get what's called a reestablishment pot of money. So very important to make sure as a RAP agent that you are going out there, you're interfacing with your RAP displacees and making sure that, again, they're getting all those documents that they need. We have what we typically just call a RAP package that we're providing to our displacees, and for our owners, again, that should be at the same time that they're getting their first written offer through acquisition. For our tenants, it should be within 14 days of that first written offer being given to the owner. And it's going to include things like the standard relocation brochure that gives them an overview of what the RAP program is, right? It's a complicated program, and we want to make sure that our displacees are a little bit educated on what's going to be happening. The Title VI brochure continues to be important. I know you've seen that through other parts of the process, and we also are giving them that Title VI brochure again to make sure that they understand their rights. They get a notice of eligibility. And again, this is kind of going through their different items that they're entitled to, the advisory services, the moving, the relocation housing payments for our non-residential and the reestablished, or sorry, for the residential, there are relocation housing payments, and for the non-residential, the reestablishment. And that's followed up for our residential with other forms, right? They'll also get a conditional entitlement later on. Everyone is entitled to a 90-day informational notice. So this goes back to the timelines that we were talking about. You cannot have your displacees move prior to giving them a 90-day notice. And a lot of times this will at least be an informational. With our residential, that also has to be followed up by a 30-day before you can, start any kind of proceedings to get them out of the property. So very important. And these timelines are driven by our Uniform Act, right? Again, they're not, or by California law. So they're not arbitrary rules that Caltrans has come up with. They actually are under both the Uniform Act as well as California law. Let's see. What do we have here? All right, I'm just making sure I go through my notes here quickly to make sure I'm not missing anything that is important. Good here. And just a reiteration that for our non-residential, as I kind of discussed already, they will get those moving and related expenses, which are going to be actual, reasonable, and necessary. So, I had a 300,000 square foot printing company that I moved a few years ago, and they had machinery that was ordered from an Italian company that could only be worked on by by that particular Italian company. And so in order for us to move that printing press, we had to fly employees from Italy over in order to do all of the deinstall and then reinstall at the new place. And so that, that was a very expensive process, but also something to keep in mind, right? When it comes to our deinstall and reinstall, we do what's actually required. We cannot move a piece of machinery that is under contract for a particular business contract, whatever, if that will kind of invalidate the warranty or mess up the machinery in the move. But for everything else, again, we're going to be doing something like a bid and going based off of that bid. And that's, again, actual, reasonable, and necessary, unless we're talking about anything that is real property. And then we have some items we can pay under reestablishment up to that $33,200 limit. There's an in lieu payment that's referenced here. The in lieu payment is very nice for items, offices that are smaller. So for example, if you have, again, a tax preparer's office and they just have a few desks and some computers and a printer, we can look at what their taxes were over the last 2 years, average that out, and they would get paid whatever that average is up to $53,200. So if they make $100,000 for 2 years in a row, you average that out, that's $100,000. They would max out at that $53,200. But this can be a very nice incentive for, again, kind of smaller businesses that don't have a lot to move, that are not very complex, in order to kind of, get them to move quickly of their own volition, um, and also to make it a little bit easier on the agency. We have a line here for consequential displacement. This is going to be when we're affecting, maybe we're not affecting the house, let's say, of a single family residence. Maybe we're taking 80% of the yard, but the house is untouched. We may still go ahead and relocate them. Most likely we'll be relocating them in a situation like that. And that's called a consequential displacement. It's really going to the displacement of a person, business, farm, or nonprofit organization from the unacquired remaining property as a direct result of the acquisition for the proposed project. So again, we're going to be acquiring 80% of the yard. The house is untouched. In a typical residential lot, that doesn't really leave a very usable property for them. So although the house isn't being touched, we'll go ahead and relocate them. Same kind of idea can apply to a farm or to a business. And there are a few examples in the right-of-way manual under section 1001, 03, 07 for what qualifies and how to deal with something like that. Okay, planning for businesses. We've talked about a number of these items already. You'll want to contact businesses early in the project. You will want to do that interview with them to understand how their business works and what is being produced. You'll explain the businesses, work closely with them. The big thing to keep in mind is that there are no global settlements. A global settlement meaning, that you would say, hey, here's your total pot of money for all acquisition, all relocation, through our attorneys, and we're all done. You're not able to do that with your relocation benefits, and that is under the Uniform Act, right? Relocation benefits are a reimbursement. We're a reimbursement program, and we are actual, reasonable, and necessary. And so a global settlement does not accurately reflect what is going to be actual, reasonable, and necessary in relocating that business. Again, it gets away from that reimbursement aspect of the relocation program. And so, keep in mind, that's not something that you're able to do with RAP, and you run the risk if you say, okay, we're doing this global settlement, you run the risk of them going back and still coming after you for additional relocation funds, right? So if you say, hey, this is all you're getting, and they come back and say, wait, we actually relocated, and that global settlement that you gave me doesn't cover all of our move, you're still going to be on the hook for whatever it actually costs them to move. So keep in mind, again, that's not something that you can do with that relocation program. So the last slide, which is extremely important, is that even before you start doing your relocations, you need to have a relocation appeals board on hand. And so essential members of that relocation appeals board are going to be attorneys, your relocation subject matter expert. And it really does have to be somebody that knows the program inside and out. District coordination with your local programs coordinator and your district local assistance engineer. So there will, you'll need to discuss with Caltrans what that will look like. And, again, displacees can technically ask for an appeal on anything, right? If you come to them and say, hey, we don't think that you qualify, they can appeal and say, actually, I think you're wrong. I do think I qualify. And they have that right to kind of appear in front of the board and be heard. not that the board will necessarily grant what they're asking for, but they have that right. And that goes for, if we say, oh, we think that you're only entitled to this much for your move costs, they can come back, they can appeal that. So really any part of our RAP program is appealable, and you must have that relocation appeals board in place before you start doing any of your relocation activities. In the relocation appeal, documentation is incredibly important. The relocation appeals board is going to need diary entries of what's been happening on this displacement. They'll need copies of all of the documents that are exchanged, and so this is one of those areas where if you're not providing the displacees all of the different notices that are required under that Uniform Act or under California law, again, you can kind of get into trouble with the appeals board, right? Um, any kind of pictures, correspondence, really practically the entirety of your file, or the entirety of your file, depending on what the appeal is, will be given to that appeals board for them to review in order to determine if the appeal should be granted to the displacee or not. But very incredibly important to know that this process can happen, and that as the displacement is occurring, that we are keeping all of our documents together, really clean, updated, and that we're giving them, again, those proper notices, especially those notices of eligibility, our general information notice in the very beginning, before while we're starting to appraise the property, our notices of vacation, right? So all those key notices are going to be incredibly important, as well as the timeline in which we delivered them. These are also items that are going to be important in order for the right-of-way certification. Again, in order for the right-of-way certification to be approved, it is Caltrans' job to make sure that relocation has moved at a clip that is appropriate. And again, those documents and timelines are being adhered to. And so you'll want to make sure you're keeping that documentation in line for right-of-way certification as well. I think that's all I have on my side. Oops, sorry. There you go. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have one. How early can you contact a property owner that will need to be relocated?
So our general information notice is a very, very brief overview of the program, and that can be sent out pretty early. Caltrans is usually sending out the general information notice around the time that our appraisers are going to be reaching out to the property owners. I think that we've found if we do it earlier than that, it creates a lot of anxiety for our owners. And again, they don't qualify for the program until we've given that, initiation of negotiations or notice of intent to acquire. So you want to kind of balance out your responsibility for providing information on the relocation program and the anxiety that it does produce in your owners if you kind of do it too early, let's say. But of course, if they reach out to you, you'll want to make sure that they know that they kind of have an idea of what the benefits are, at least a general overview, whatever you would kind of find in that general information notice, which is available through our Chapter 10 forms. And, make sure you're kind of answering their questions at that time. Hopefully that answers the question.
Just a reminder, because I did see some people still trickling in during Megan's presentation. If you have questions, there is a Q&A box that we ask you input those questions into. And then at the end of the presentation, we will then ask those questions. So if there are any more questions, please put them in. If not, I think we can proceed on to the wonderful chapter of utilities.
All
That's
right, great. Thank you very much, everyone. And again, just make sure that you do have someone that either can devote the time to really understanding rap inside and out, or again, are bringing on a subject matter expert for rap because it is quite complicated, I think, as we've discussed. But I wish all of you luck with your projects. Thank you for having me.
thanks, Bacon. Great job. Appreciate it. All right. We will now start on the utility relocation section with Brian Goldman. Brian, take it away.
Hello, everyone. So I believe you can all see the presentation. All right, so we are talking about utility relocation in this section. So I did take a brief moment to look through the participant list. Usually we'll have a couple people who are consultants or local agencies that we've had in the class before. I didn't recognize anyone, so I was just going to step away and let them present, but I guess I'll have to do it now. So what we're sharing today is a generalized view of utility relocations throughout the state. So what we're sharing are the general rules, but things are done slightly differently in each district. So you're going to want to work with your local assistance coordinator in each of your districts to find out if there's anything that's done slightly differently. The general rules should all stay the same. And everything that we do is based off of federal regulation, state regulation. So that's how our manual's written, is off of those regulations and codes. So if it's in the manual, we're not just throwing it in there just because it seems like it's a good idea for Caltrans. So if you've ever had a project where you've had a utility relocation like this, it makes you think twice about doing more work in the beginning, doing more positive location, communicating better, because when you have a situation like this, it slows your project down. What is a utility relocation? So it's not just having to move a utility from one place to another. It's the adjustment of utility facilities required by the highway project. So this includes removing and reinstalling the facilities. This includes temporary facilities, acquiring necessary rights of way for those utilities to relocate into, moving, rearrange, or changing. So this also includes adjustments. So if you have a water valve lid, and you're just adjusting it to grade, that's a conflict and that's a relocation. If you are you have a sewer line that's 4 feet down and you're going down to like 2.5 foot of excavation, and the utility owner wants that facility protected. So maybe you need to put a steel plate in to spread out the force of anything driving on top of it. You might need to do a concrete slurry. Anything you do to actually keep that facility in place is a conflict, the way that it's viewed in terms of federal projects. So in those situations, you would need to have a utility package. You would need to go through the entire process. If it's something that you have where there's a utility pull on your project, it's not in conflict, you just want to make sure that the contractor that's out there is not going to run into it with their excavator. So you might put protect in place on your plans, and that can be confusing. So that is just a warning note. So I would just put a cautionary note on there that says utility present, not in conflict or not relocating, something to where the contractor knows it's there so they don't hit it, but it's clear to everyone that's working on the plans that it's not an actual conflict, because otherwise we're going to be looking for a utility package for those facilities. So there's a difference between a public utility and a design feature. So public utilities are the ones that we typically will do utility packages for. So these include electric transmission and distribution facilities, telephone and fiber, and now broadband is now considered a public utility. Petroleum, gas, water, sewer, cable TV. Here's where it gets tricky though. The fire hydrants and street lights, depending on the situation, can be a public utility, but they can also be part of the roadway design and a design feature that would not be part of the utility package. A lot of that just depends on who the owner is. So you have to look at the maintenance agreements and any other documentation for when those facilities were installed. So it might be, you might have a situation where a local agency is the owner of the facility. So they own the streetlights, and the utility company, let's say PG&E in this situation, is the one that serves the electricity to the light. You could have an agreement in place that says that you are going to take care of all relocations as a local agency, but you could also have a similar agreement on a different project that says the utility company is responsible for all relocations when these projects occur. So you really need to go and look at those records. But some of those design features, basically, those would include electric services to traffic signals, signs, and street lights, fiber optic and telephone for the same reasons, drainage facilities that are associated and associated pipes and manholes, water lines used in landscaping, and again, street lights and fire hydrants. These are facilities that directly support the operation of the street or roadway. Other situations where this can be tricky is if you have a combined water and sewer facility. So each of those situations, it's best to talk to your local systems coordinator, and they can help you walk through these situations. So again, streetlights, storm drain signals are not typically considered a public utility and do not need a package, but there are times that they are included. All right, so pursuant to Government Code 4215, governmental agencies shall make every reasonable effort to locate all existing utility facilities within the right-of-way of a proposed construction project. So you need to do your due diligence to actually figure out what's out there. So this includes going and checking for right-of-way record maps for past projects, reviewing the old files for any of our projects or your projects that have been in that general area. Because if we've already done the positive location, if we already have the as-built for where we know the utilities were, and again, this is assuming that the as-built are correct, but we can utilize that information and it'll save us a lot of time and effort to be able to figure out where these utilities are and know if they're even in conflict or not. So if we know that there's a facility, but it's 5 feet away from where we're doing any construction, that's good enough. You know, if they're, you know, right under our construction where we're going to be excavating, we might need more information, and that's when we do additional work beyond that. So you check the county recorder's office. You'd check with others in your office as well. So just because you might not have worked on a project, other people in your office might remember a project that you had in that general area. You can contact USA or Dig Alert to find out what utilities are there, field reviews, encroachment permit files, and ground and aerial surveys. How to verify utilities. So you prepare a verification map using all the collected information that you've received so far. So you've gone out to the field, you know that there are paddles out there for some gas facilities. You know, there are water valve lids in the ground. Obviously, the poles you're going to be able to spot, and that shouldn't be as big of an issue. I do recommend that as soon as you get a project, you drive the project. Google Maps is not always accurate. The information on there could be years old, and there could be brand new facilities that are out there on your project site that you don't even know about because you haven't gone out there yet. It's just a simple thing that you can do to ensure that you're utilizing the most up-to-date information. So the map should include all existing and proposed right-of-way lines, as well as all of the utility information that we've been able to collect so far. The utility coordinator will send the mapping to the utility owners, requesting that that the facility maps be sent back, or what we prefer is verification mapping. So if we send facility maps to the owner, they'll basically take that and verify what we put on our plans, and they'll add pertinent information such as the pressure for gas facilities, the voltage for overhead electric. These are items that'll help us determine is this a low risk facility? Is this a high risk facility? And how we need to move forward. So we do encourage the utility owners to provide as much information as they can on these plans. We allow up to 30 days for the utility companies to respond. It sometimes takes a little bit longer, especially if you're asking for a segment that could be 5 to 10 miles long. It's going to take much longer than if you're just asking for a couple poles. So the other thing is that it's the responsibility of you, the coordinator, to continue to reach out to these utility companies to make sure that you're going to get these maps back in a timely manner. So I wouldn't reach out to them weekly, but I wouldn't sit there and send out a notice that you want everything back in a month and then just hope it's going to show up. I'd check back 2 weeks later just to see how everything's going and make sure that everyone's still on schedule. And then you can do positive location, which is where you basically put eyes on the facilities in the ground. So if you haven't ever seen this, I would strongly recommend, when you have the opportunity, go see it happen in real life. What they do is they'll take a vacuum truck that will spray water or air into a 12-inch hole in the ground, and they'll basically dig a hole straight down, and it'll get progressively bigger as they go down further. But the idea is they want to find where that underground facility is. So we want to actually see where it is. We want to be able to measure it, and then we're going to survey that. So when we do our plans, we have 100% accurate information on where those facilities are. And it's important, as the engineer who's designing the project, to be the person who's out there putting your eyes on those pipes in the ground. All right, so Government Code 4215, we mentioned earlier, governmental agencies shall locate all existing facilities within the right-of-way and identify it on the plans. And that shall is not a suggestion, that is a need in order for the project to move forward. Governmental Code 4216 requires that all underground facilities are positively located with the exact location. Now, with that being said, you do not have to do positive location every 5 feet. There is a reasonable distance, and I believe that's 100 feet between locations. And you can supplement with electronic detection in between. Again, reach out to your local agency coordinator at Caltrans, and they'll be able to help walk you through that process. And this is why you want to make sure that you're figuring out exactly where those facilities are. This is a real picture. Well, of course, it's a real picture. It's a picture from a project that we had in Napa. I believe it was in the early 2000s. To make it even worse, this line was positively identified. They had signs on the ground saying that there was an underground gas facility right under where that excavator punched into it. So we will do everything we can to avoid emergencies, but even if we do everything we can, it still doesn't eliminate stuff like this from happening. So it's prudent for us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to avoid this and minimize the risks to our employees and the project and the traveling public. The steps for utility relocation. You're going to identify the utility conflicts using the verification plans, plat maps, pothole information, and you're going to use all that. You're going to come up with the conflicts. These conflicts have to be either a policy or a physical conflict. You cannot just call something in conflict because it's convenient for the project. It would be easier. Your mom said it would be cool if you did it that way. None of those work. It has to be a specific need, and it has to be justifiable, because the utility companies can basically fight back on the need. So the utility coordinator will work with the utility owners to resolve all conflicts by developing the relocation plans and schedule the relocation. And again, the utility company is going to provide the relocation plans, but this is something that as the coordinator, you want to work with them on a regular basis to see how those are going, see if there are any issues with it, see if they can give you a progress set of plans so you can see maybe they're not on the right path. You know, they need to be on the right side of the road and they're on the left side of You want to get that stuff earlier than when they give the final submission, and then you have to go back and have them redo their plans. You also need to agree on the scheduling, so you can't just say, hey, I need you out next week. It has to be something that's both reasonable and something that's doable for the company. With that being said, if Kinder Morgan says it's going to be 3 years before they can get to a relocation, that's not acceptable. It has to be something that's reasonable. And then there should be an agreement on the liability determination or who pays, and that's all based on your installation rights. So are you installed by easement? Are you installed by permit? Who has that prior and superior right? So the utility companies will furnish the documents to the local assistance utility oversight coordinator for review. And then basically, once we've looked at the plans, and it's very important that we look at these plans early and often, because we're going to let you know if you're on the right track. We have a ton of forms. Some of them are easy to fill out. Some of them aren't as easy. And we're here to help you. So if you give us the utility package early on, we will turn that around and give you comments in a week, maybe a little more. But if we're doing that 9 months to a year prior to cert, and then you're not doing anything with that package until a month before cert and expect that it's going to get done in time, the chances are likely that it won't. And so what we need is, if we give you those comments, fix those plans, send them back to us. We'll say, oh yeah, everything looks good now. You're ready to go get the signatures. So now you're 6 to 8 months prior to cert. You can go get the utility package signed. You can get the notice to owner sent out. All of your stuff is ready to go, and you could even have the utility company relocate prior to certification, which is the ideal thing in the utility world, but it rarely ever happens. So after all that's said and done, the utility company is going to go out. They're going to get all these documents signed. Sorry, the local agency will get the utility companies to sign the documents. They'll send it back with the filled out certification, and you should be ready to go. So we will need those executed copies of all the utility agreements in a completed package. And then again, you're going to fill out either the exhibit 13A or 13B, which is the right way cert. So here's a big question. If you have a project, is it a local programs project or is it a local assistance project? And the difference really is it on or off the state highway system? And the way that we view that is it touching Caltrans freeways or highways? If you're doing an interchange project, that is an on-system project, and Caltrans needs more oversight. Because you're doing work on our facilities, we want to make sure that it complies with the needs of the traveling public. If you're doing something where you're 5 miles off of our roadway, but you're seeking federal funding, we're involved because FHWA has oversight for your federal funds. And because Caltrans gets money from FHWA, they've gifted us the responsibility of doing oversight for the local projects for them, mainly because they don't have the resources to be able to do it. So for those off-system projects, you're going to be using the Local Assistance Procedures Manual, Chapter 14, that has all the utility stuff in there. If you're an on-system project, so you're doing an interchange, anything where you're actually impacting the state's right-of-way, that's an on-system project, and you'll be operating out of the Caltrans right-of-way manual, Chapter 13. So you have to use those forms. Those forms cannot change. With the local assistance forms out of the LAPM, you can make minor changes. So either of these, if you need to change state to county, city, your local agency that's the lead agency, you can do that. There's not a problem with that. Anything beyond that, you're starting to change the intent of the clauses, and those have to go through a legal review. Those legal reviews can take as little as 45 days, but depending on if we have to go back and forth, we could be looking at well over a year for before we're able to find a solution. So So just a quick recap, if you're working on system, you're going to use Chapter 13 of the right-of-way manual. If you're off system, it's a local assistance project. It would be Chapter 14 of the LAPM. All right, documentation of the utility relocations. So each local agency should have a project-specific file for each utility company. So you should have a project file that has all the project in it. So it should have every utility company, the appraisals and acquisition. But you, for each of your utility companies that's in conflict, should have a separate utility file. And that also includes if you have PG&E electric, transmission, electric distribution, and then a gas distribution. Those would be three completely separate utility packages and would get their own files as well. So your file should include a copy of the notice to owner, report of investigation, a detailed estimate of the relocation costs, the owner's claim of liability letter, the utility agreement if it's needed, the utility owner's approved relocation plans. So those should be sent by the utility owner, but whoever is the engineer who's signing off on this project is the one who also needs to sign off to make sure that those utility plans clear construction. And then if needed, specific authorization, which is the Exhibit 14C. And this is anytime you're seeking federal reimbursement, this 14C has to be completed prior to any work being done, or it's not federally reimbursable. So claim a liability letter and an estimate. Your claim a liability letter is basically describing what the liability is. I know, confusing name. The breakdown of the liability will basically explain it's 100% owner expense pursuant to franchise installation, Streets and Highways Code 673. This is where you're describing why we're paying or why the utility company's paying. Who's doing the relocation work? So is it being done by the owner or is it being done by the contractor for the construction project? Whose plans are being used? So if you're using the utility company's plans, that's great. You don't need them to sign off on them because they made the plans. If we're using local agency or state's plans, that's a different story. We need the utility company to sign off on our plans to make sure that we have documentation that they're okay with moving forward with these plans. Typically, these are when we're doing the relocation, our contractor is doing the relocation work for the utility company. But we still want to make sure that when we put this in the ground, it's usable for the needs that they have. And then it's also helpful to include the number of working days that it's going to require to actually get the relocation done. So if PG&E says it's going to take 3 months to relocate this line of utility poles, then don't put 30 days for the amount of time it's going to take because you're shorting yourself. Now, with that being said, if they say it's going to take 6 years, that's not reasonable. Again, this is why having a good relationship with our utility partners is vital, because you are going to have these disagreements regularly, and to be able to work with our utility partners and come up with a solution is the only way that we can continue to keep our projects moving forward. So the estimate of cost should include all relocation costs. It should not include any contingencies. And then salvage and depreciation credits should be included, but can be a generalized number. So if you're, a 5% number, something like that, it's typical in this industry. Your report of investigation is your story. So this is how in 5 years from now, if someone picks up your project, they can go to the report of investigation and read that and understand how you came up to the determination of the liability that you have, or the verification of what was provided to you by the utility company. So it's needed for all utility conflicts where the utility agency pays for any portion of the relocation work, even $1. Certain districts require a report of investigation for all utilities regardless of funding source. Basically because it makes it clear 5 years down the road what happened on that project, regardless of who picks it up. So it describes the project, the conflicts, relocation plans, proof of the owner's prior rights if they have them, It's signed by the utility coordinator for the local agency and the Caltrans delegated district representative, which is typically the senior right-of-way agent over local assistance or utilities, depending on the district. It's an internal document for Caltrans or the local agency. This is not something we send to the utility companies. It's basically our records and it stays in our file. So same thing with the local agencies. It's for your records. We do want a copy of it, but this is for you to keep in your files. So years down the road, you can remember what happened to your project. That must have a narrative in section 8. This can be included as a Word document attachment, but it basically is going into more detail about the liability and other pertinent information. And then a color-coded or approved relocation plan must be included with all packages. It should be signed like we stated before. We want to make sure that what we're doing is safe for the public, that we are going to be able to operate our facilities in the future, and that what the utility companies are putting in the ground is actually beneficial for them. Because if they put the wrong thing in, they might have to come back out and do a whole separate project where they're going to basically impede the traveling public for a second time. And we want to minimize that. Your notice to owner is a legally binding document requiring the utility owner to relocate its facilities. So the notice to owner number is chosen by the local agency. It must match the report of investigation and UA numbers. So the notice to owner number for local programs project, those are a little different. Those are going to be provided by your Caltrans utility coordinator. So we have a system in place where we can basically provide that to you. But for the off-system projects, you can basically use whatever numbering system you want. It just needs to be separate for each utility company. So typically what we do at Caltrans is we have a numbering system like 1, 2, 3, 4 point, and then the 1 is specific to PG&E, 3 is AT&T. It might be different in each district, but we separate it out that way. That way it's clear every time we have a PG&E relocation or an electric relocation, it's usually this number. So the notice to owner includes what facilities are in conflict, what's happening. So, we're asking you to relocate your electric facilities in accordance with plan number 1, 2, 3, dated this date, consisting of 3 sheets. And the reason why you want us to do that is because you're setting the specific plan date and amount of sheets that you've approved. So if they come in and they relocate their facilities and they move to the other side of the street and they have plans and it shows that they're relocating where they said, but those plans are from, 1936, then, it's 2 years after the approved plans that we went off of, that we noticed them off of. And if we haven't signed that, we haven't approved it, then that's not okay for them to go ahead and do. They're going to have to fix that on their own. If on the other side, we tell them that they can relocate and they have plans and they relocate according to their plans, and we change our design and, either cause damage to their facility or make them relocate again, they have a clear, they have the notice to owner that clearly states what plans they relocated based off of. And so it makes it easier for situations like that. It'll also include the relocation schedule, which will have start and end dates, the local agency's contact information, liability determination, and each notice must be signed by an authorized representative. So it just can't be any random person. Typically, this is your public works director or someone at a higher level. But they have to be given the delegation by your governing board to be able to sign on behalf of that agency. So this is what your notice to owner looks like on the left. And then we do have a revised notice to owner on the right. This is a tool that you can use, but your notice to owner is a legally binding document. We do not want to send a bunch of these out. You send one notice out and anything beyond that is a revised notice. We don't want 15 revised notices either because it confuses everything. So while we want you to prepare and work early, you need to have your project and your scope set in stone, and then don't change it after that. So at Caltrans, we like to say the word or the phrase "pencils down" approach. We're still working on making that actually happen. But the idea is that you want to make sure that these legally binding documents are done correctly, and we only do them as needed. Utility agreements are required in some situations, mainly when there's any state or federal funds being used on the project, even $1. Doesn't matter if it's for utilities, it could be for right-of-way or construction or anything else, but that federalizes the project and now it needs a utility agreement. When a local assistance contractor is doing the work for the utility owner, even if it's the utility owner's expense, because we're getting paid by the utility company, reimbursed, we still had to pay the contractor for the work being done, and therefore we would still need a utility agreement in that situation as well. So Exhibit 14F in the LAPM Chapter 14 is the utility agreement. There is a specific 14I, and that is for a local assistance project where you have a city facility in the city street. So they call that an implied secondary easement. It only works for local agencies when it's their own facilities and their own right-of-way. But it's basically a streamlined utility agreement, and that's Exhibit 14I. You'll find the clauses that have been approved by Caltrans Legal in Exhibit 14G. So you can basically pull those out and just throw those right in the agreement. Again, those cannot change. Any change would require a legal review and does take time. And everyone says, well, my project will be able to get it done. You won't. You're going to sit there for months trying to get it done, and eventually you're going to backtrack and go to some other approach instead of finishing up the legal route. Not that you can't find success there, but typically it does not meet the timelines that the local agencies want to continue down, and they just look for a different approach. All utility agreements must be fully executed prior to right-of-way certification as well. So they do take time. If it's over, and I'm going to throw out $250,000 because that's what popped into my head. But most companies have a certain threshold to where they can sign utility agreements without having to elevate it to an executive level. But once it has to go to that executive level, usually it's in a different city at their headquarters office, and those can typically take quite a bit longer to get routed. So federal authorization to proceed with utility relocations. So this is the right-of-way utility E76, and it's required when the local agency seeks reimbursement for work performed by the utility owner. So the construction E76 is required when the work is being performed as a contract bid item. Any cost for the work performed prior to the E76 approval is ineligible for federal aid. And I stated that earlier. That's your Exhibit 14C that you're going to fill out. And you can fill out one for the utility agreement and notice to owner. You don't have to do separate ones. You can check all the boxes there. The E76 must list the owner's names, facility type, and estimate of cost for the necessary relocation. And then qualifications for reimbursement. The utility relocation must be caused by the project. The local agency is legally liable for the cost and no betterment is being sought. So anything beyond that, the utility company can include, but they're not able to get reimbursement for those additional costs. They would have to be able to break that out and show us. So your Exhibit 14C is that specific authorization that we talked about. It's needed when the local agency expends any money and is seeking federal reimbursement on any part of the project, even $1. It's also needed so the FHWA approval is needed for both the notice to owner and utility agreements, but again, we can do that with one form. the 14C is what we use to transmit the specific authorization. It used to be something different back in the day. It was the E76. And as approval is required prior to beginning any physical work. And that's typically signed by the Caltrans senior right-of-way agent or the delegated district representative. So 100% owner expense liability is not eligible for federal aid if they're doing their own work. Well, period. So, and in those situations, because there's no federal aid being requested, no specific authorization would be required. So this is a stretched out version of what the 14C would look like. Again, you can see right here, I believe you can see my cursor. This top one is for when you're doing the notice to owner, so the specific authorization to relocate utilities. And again, down here, you have your relocation one, which is specific to the notice to owner, and then your utility agreement ones are the second ones. So it should make it a little more clear. And again, your utility coordinator for local assistance at Caltrans is your best friend. Make sure that you're talking to them often, and they will help keep your project on track if you're willing to keep them in the loop. So Buy America background, we're going to share a little bit of the old information. I'm going to throw a little bit of the new information that's come forth since January. We have had, it's called the Build America, Buy America, yeah, it's BABA, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But basically, it's a continuation of the Buy America rules. It basically extended or expanded some of the rules. So MAP 21 became effective in October of 2012. Moving ahead for progress in the 21st Century Act. It originally included all iron and steel permanently incorporated into a highway. Oh, there it is. Build America, Buy America is the BABA Act. And so they basically expanded to construction materials and manufactured product this year. Those all now have to be compliant. Earlier this year, when they announced it, we had a July date for the iron and steel, or the construction material and manufactured product had to be compliant as of October 1st. Those dates have all passed. And so we've been meeting with all the utility companies. FHWA is not at this time doing trainings on the updates to the Buy America presentation. So Caltrans is working on trying to get something put together, but it might be a little while before that's ready. So any iron or steel components that are installed need to meet the compliance requirements for Buy America, including construction materials and now manufactured product. So if you're taking two products and you're putting those products together, that's a manufactured product. And if those components aren't manufactured in the United States, then you're talking about compliance issues. So you will use clauses from the right-of-way manual. The local assistance manual is in the process of being updated with the new clauses. So I would recommend that you look at the clauses from the right-of-way manual, chapter 13. So in section 7 of the clauses, it's specific to the Buy America clauses. We moved those out of section 5 to make it a little easier. So that the basics of Buy America. And I would recommend that you do more research on Buy America itself. The utility companies are trying to get caught up with the regulations, as well as trying to get the materials that are compliant. So if you have questions, please reach out to your local assistance coordinator, and they should be able to help. But iron and steel needs to be compliant. Construction materials, which includes non-ferrous metals, plastics, polymers, glass, lumber, drywall, fiber optic cables, optical fiber, engineering wood, and concrete. which isn't on here. There was a waiver in 1983 that basically allowed us not to have to worry about the manufactured products, but that was rescinded earlier this year in January, and so that's really what sparked this October date for the manufactured products having to be compliant. And here's a link to the Buy America information on the FHWA site. And with that, the utilities presentation is done, but I am ready for any questions that we have.
And boy, are there questions.
I love questions. And honestly, that's so when we have in-person trainings, I really like people to break into the conversation and share some of the challenges that they have. But when you have over 200 people in a training virtually, it's a lot harder to do that. So we will get to as many of these questions as we can, and I will let Robbie take it away with question one.
All right, question one. What are the certification requirements for utilities when the LPA owns the property? By when should the conflict be resolved?
So if there's federal funding on the project, then they have to follow the entire process for a local assistance project. So you'd need a full utility package, you'd need the certification, all of that. It really doesn't matter who owns the property. Who owns the property is only going to dictate, and really it's, are you doing work within the Caltrans operating right of way? So if you're doing that, then it's an on-system project. If you're not, if it's a couple miles outside of our right of way, but you're seeking federal funds, then it would be a local assistance project. You would still need to go through the whole process. I would strongly recommend that you start the process of verifying utilities at least 18 months before CERT, that you have your conflict maps out to the utility company a minimum of a year before CERT. And there's no reason why, if you follow that schedule, you shouldn't be ready to start the project 6 months prior to the certification date. What we see more times than not is we will give comments a year in advance because they've given us a utility package. We'll never see anything or receive comments back until 2 weeks prior to CERT. And it's not the package that's filled out and ready to go because we gave them comments that they never made edits to. So now they're just asking if they're ready to go get signatures, which they still haven't made the changes that we suggested the first time. So if we're going to give you the changes, get on those changes right away, make them, send it back to us, because we can tell you, yeah, you're good to go. You can go get these signed whenever. That means you can get them signed today, you can get them signed in 6 weeks, but the longer you wait, the more risk to your certification date that you're going to possibly encounter. So I also strongly recommend that you do not change scopes or schedule, because once you have these plans in place and you change the scope at all, everything starts over. So.
All right, next question. If it's in the maintenance agreement that it's public utility's responsibility to relocate and it's only the utility conflicting with the project, is a utility package or utility certification required?
Yes, the utility is in conflict with the project and there's federal funds. Yep.
Next question. Whose responsibility is it to pothole utilities for determination of location and depth?
I mean, that's a tricky situation. The responsibility to have the information is up to the local agency. The responsibility to pay for the relocation or for the potholing depends on how you operate. So the way that the state of California does it is we have positive location agreements with each of the utility companies saying that we understand that the liability might be on you, but the state is willing to pay for the cost of positive location if you allow us to just go do it with our contractor, because it allows us to control the schedule. With that being said, the utility company needs to, the local agency needs to get that positive location done, and you'll probably end up fighting with the utility companies So as a cost of doing business, a lot of the times it's just easier to do it yourself as part of the design cost.
Okay, good answer. Next question. The existing storm drain manhole owned by the LPA needs to be adjusted to the new grade. Would the LPA need to include it in the utility package?
Yes, it's a utility that's in conflict. Any utility that's in conflict, period, needs a package. Adjustment, protect in place, relocating it 10 miles away, relocating it to Europe. I mean, that one's going to be way harder because I don't know how we're going to get the property rights or connect the roadway, but yeah. So next question.
Are there any certifications necessary to be a utility coordinator?
No. You don't need any certifications. I would be careful with who you have as a utility coordinator. It should be someone who's detail oriented, is able to keep track of what's happened on a project and put that down in notes, because you're going to need to go back to those notes to find out where projects went wrong. And that's not saying that you're going to make that it's your fault or anything. Mistakes happen on projects all the time. Projects change all the time. You're going to have to go back and figure out where you were at the point when this project changed. And if you're not taking good notes, then you're just going to be lost. And so thinking about the right people in those positions is important, but actually having a certification isn't. A lot of this stuff you're going to learn through the process. With that being said, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to other local agencies, other consultants, other people in your office. Find out how they do it, how they've walked through it. Have they been trained? Utilize the resources we have around us, basically. So.
Nice. Next question. When should we get the potholing done typically?
Early. As soon as, so if you know your project is not changing its scope and these utilities are in conflict, do the potholing. Now, with that being said, usually you have to wait until you have funding for the project. So for Caltrans projects, we can't do it in the K phase. We don't have the funding for it. It's too early. The money for the project hasn't been allocated yet for that portion of it. So usually we wait until after that in the zero phase because of the restrictions we have.
Right. Next question. What about an instance where a project is going to be going underneath a state highway, assuming that it counts as an on-system?
Yes, so it is an on-system, and if you're talking about a facility that's pipe, so you have a gas or water facility, those have extra requirements. So most of the time, those have to be encased if they're underneath our highway, and that's for safety purposes. So on access controlled freeways, you actually have that casing pipe that will let that say you have a gas line underneath our highway. You want to have a pipe that goes that our other pipe is in. So if there's a leak, all of that gas is going to go out the sides, and it's basically going to vent outside of our highway. So if for some reason there is an explosion, it's not under the freeway, it'll basically go outside of the right of way. So yes, anytime any work is being done in the operating right of way of the state, it's on system, regardless of where it is or what they're doing.
Are utility owners required to sign Exhibit 14D?
The notice? No. They're not required to sign it. On the notice to owner, there's a line in the middle of the page. Here, let me get back to that. Right here, you're just typing in the name of the notice and their address. They don't need to sign it. With that being said, on a revised notice to owner, we do like to have them sign in this section. Oh, I just clicked. right here. And that's only if they don't, that's fine. Put refuse to sign and have the email that they said saying that they're not going to sign it, whatever. But if we want to know that the utility company is on board with what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be sneaky, and we want to make sure that, again, when the relocation happens, we can go back to this revised notice to owner that they've signed and said, yes, we've updated to these plans. So it's just to basically help protect you.
All right. How long does it take to get the Exhibit 14F utility agreement reviewed and approved? We've modified the standard clauses from the Exhibit 14G utility agreement clauses, but was informed that non-standard clauses will need Caltrans headquarters approval, which take up to 45 days. It has been a lot longer than 45 days, but we still not have heard from headquarters. We followed up a few times too, but have no updates.
So, yeah, I don't know about that specific situation. I can tell you that most of the time when people are wanting clauses changed, it's not going to happen. I'll just be completely open and honest with you. These are all clauses that have been approved by legal because they meet the needs of the federal requirements. Anytime you change even one word on those clauses, you're changing the intent of the clause. The likelihood of those clauses getting changed is not good. And most of the time it doesn't, the need for what they actually want isn't really there because we have clauses that address the needs for that particular situation. So if you are having an issue with not getting those clauses approved, feel free to reach out to me. And it's something that I'm willing to look into. So there are a lot of situations where we've been working with legal on it for 3 to 6 months because one, we need to actually get a legal ruling on it, but more times than not, we're not being given enough information to be able to come up with a conclusion. And so it requires going back and forth with the local agencies. But I will say that we've had on a regular basis, local agencies are not being patient and letting the process play out. So we, as the utility coordinators, are here to ensure your projects are successful. So when we are reviewing your projects, when we send something to legal, and then a local agency decides that they're going to have their legal contact our legal because they think they can expedite it or elevate it, or a local agency decides that even though Caltrans provided comments 9 months ago, they spent 8.5 months not doing anything with those comments, and now they want the review done in the next week and turned around because they're going to miss their funding deadline. And the reality is that the funding deadline could have been addressed by turning in your information on time, and we're here to help you. But first and foremost, we're here to make sure that you're in compliance with federal law, because if your project isn't covered under, if you're not following federal law, you're liable for potentially losing federal funding, not just on this project, but you can lose the ability to even seek federal funding on other projects for years. And so we're really here to make sure that you're in compliance. And a lot of the times, local agencies just want to meet that deadline and are willing to go above and try to elevate, but more times than not, that slows down the process. Robbie, next one.
Is Buy America only required for federally funded projects, but not state funded projects?
If there's federal funding on the project at all, then it's required. There are very few state projects that don't have any federal funding on them.
Just to follow up with that, Brian, we do like them to act like there is potential federal funding on the project in case down the line they do end up requesting federal aid. So it's best to have gone through the project acting like there's Fed aid on the project so that you guys don't have to go back and readjust everything.
Yep. Yeah, and then another thing is for your local assistance projects, your off-system projects, those all need it. And the reason is because we wouldn't even see it if so your utility agreement is your triggering requirement. It's actually the conflict letter that you're sending out is the determining document on if you're going to need to have that Buy America compliance. But because you're seeking federal funds, that's why we're seeing your local assistance project, because otherwise you're off system and we have no need to even see it. But because you're seeking federal funds, now we have the oversight for FHWA. So in those situations, Buy America would be included, and I would always recommend including the Buy America language. And that's also included in projects where they're not necessarily FHWA funds, but if it's a rail, FRA, Federal Rail Association project, if there are grants for that, it's the same thing. We view it as federal funds on the project period, and would need to meet those needs. So. And how many more do we have?
We have 11.
So do we want to, I'm okay with continuing, or if we need to move on, we can move on, but it's up to.
I think we continue. I think we got time.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Can utility relocations be eligible for reimbursement when they are 100% owner responsibility, but owned by the local agency building the project?
So if it's the owner's responsibility, so if it's the owner's project and the owner's paying for it, if the local agency is the owner of the project and the facilities and the land, then it's reimbursable. It would be an implied secondary easement. The project itself is responsible for the cost, and therefore it would be reimbursable.
We have been told that we are a year plus from receiving traffic pulls because of Buy America requirements. Is there a process for requesting a waiver based on availability?
There is, but you're not going to get approved. Yeah. I mean, that's the short and dirty answer. But unfortunately, yeah. With that being said, you will be able to get traffic pulls sooner than a year. What I'm finding, especially, and I'm not going to throw any utility companies under the bus, but we've been doing Buy America since at least 2012, and I know it's been earlier than that, where they've had to be compliant with iron and steel. So, you're talking 12, 13 plus years. We could have had a teenager by now. So the reality is that in these situations, they could have gone out and they could have spent all this time and had those resources to be able to get the Buy America compliant materials in the US. I think that a lot of these companies have access to it. Whether they're going to get it on time is a different story, but that very well could be part of the challenge that we're going to face with this requirement from the federal government, is that it's going to start delaying projects. With that being said, there are certain components that are not available in the US at all. Those are typically the ones that get the approval for the waiver. But if it's just a timeline thing, those typically you're going to spend more time trying to go through the waiver process than you will just procuring the actual polls. So my suggestion would be reaching out to as many of your partners as you can and find out if anyone else has good sources on where they can get this material. So.
All right, next question. If the research is completed and utility maps are provided to the utility owners and are confirmed by the utility owners as accurate, and then during construction it is determined that the utility location was off by more than 25 feet, what legal rights are there to make the utility relocate in a reasonable time? Who is responsible for the cost? And is there a state or federal law to force the issue? In other words, no conflict was identified due to the inaccurate as-built and incorrect USA marks.
Well, but the USA marks don't matter, right? Because you're doing the positive location to ensure that the utilities are where they're supposed to be. So here's the thing. If you do your due diligence and they provided you with plans that show that their utilities are 25 feet away from where you're doing construction, and you do all that, then with that being said, you're still going to be on the hook for hitting their facilities. And yes, you are still going to be looking at delaying your project because of discovered work. There's no easy way around that other than to do as much work as you can to ensure that you know where their facilities are. So that's why positive location is important. You don't need to put 50 holes in the ground to see where that is, but you want to know roughly this gas line is here, and then on the other side of the street it's here, and we can infer that it goes in a straight line from here to here. Do we know that for sure? No. It could curve and we could be off by feet, but we've done our due diligence to know where the line should be, and it matches with the plans that they've provided us. At the end of the day, we're just minimizing the amount of risk. So.
Next question. Is wet concrete that needs to be poured to form sidewalk, curb, and gutter, etc., subject to Buy America?
According to yes. So I will be very clear. We have, because of the government shutdown and other changes, in the federal government, we've gotten partial answers to some of the information, and the concrete has been on the top of our list of things that we know have to be compliant, but we don't understand how. With that being said, I don't know where the concrete is being manufactured. I can't imagine that we're bringing over manufactured concrete like material, like before it's mixed, all from China. But yes, it does need to be compliant. Well, with that being said, I'd assume that the material and the mixing would have to be done in the US.
All right, next question. Is reinforced concrete pipe subject to Buy America? Is it considered a manufactured product? If it is, does it need to have a certificate of compliance and certified mill testing report?
I don't have a definite answer to that, but I mean, yes, it would have to be compliant. Any iron or steel, with the exception of a few items that are there's some bolts and some other items that are excluded, and as well as temporary items. But other than that, it would need to be compliant. It would need to have a certification. But typically that is just a Buy America certification that all of these components should come with. If you're purchasing it, if you're paying for, if the local agency is doing work for the utility company, then the local agency's contractor is the one acquiring that material, and the local agency would be the one providing the utility company with that compliance from the vendor.
All right, next question. Does a design feature, as opposed to a public utility, require a utility package?
No. Most of those are typically done. So most of what you'll see is like a drainage. So like drainage is just done as part of the roadway design. Lighting, signal lighting, street lighting, ramp meters, all that kind of stuff is just part of the roadway design. Once you start getting into the gray areas, when you start getting into sewer, because sewer can kind of be both, especially if it's shared with drainage. But yeah, in most situations, that would be the answer.
Next question. Is the notice to owner still required when the utility will be adjusted by the utility company and local agency is not seeking federal aid for the work. Further, is the utility package and certification required?
Okay, the notice to owner is required anytime there's a utility conflict, period. So yes, there would have to be a notice to owner. Doesn't matter if there's federal aid or not. So the owner is adjusting their own facilities and they're not seeking federal aid. Then no. You should not. So if it's owner expense and the owner is doing their own relocation, you should not have to have utility. So you will not have a utility agreement, but you will still have your notice to owner and the rest of the utility package.
Yep. All right, next question. Regarding the storm drain manhole adjustment question, at the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that drainage facilities, storm drains, are considered a design feature and not typically considered a public utility and do not need a utility package. Can you please clarify why then it would need to be included in the utility package?
If you're adjusting those lids to grade, then that's a utility conflict and a utility package. If you are relocating the drainage facilities, storm drains, stuff like that, those storm drains are part of the drainage of our they're part of our drainage. So that'll be done when they redo the drainage. They'll redo those facilities and they'll reconnect them. In those situations, we don't even need to worry about the lids because those lids are typically being done as part of the relocation. It's the same thing with like PG&E when they do a mainline relocation. We don't need to tell them to reconnect all the services because they automatically do that.
Awesome. All right. I think this will be a good time for a break. A 15-minute break, then we'll come back. Since there's only 4 more questions, we'll have Brian pick up, wrap this up, and then we will move on to the next presentation. So with that being said, we will now move on to the railroad presentation of the training. And Andrea, take it away.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Brian, for working with me. Sorry about that. I didn't realize the time. So, hello, my name is Andrea Alvarez. Sorry, I'm experiencing some visual technical difficulties. My hairdo for today is a waste. But anyways, I'm the headquarters liaison for railroad and headquarters.
Andrea, can you hit the display settings and swap your display again?
Oh, shoot. Did it happen again?
And I don't know, we're gonna, for those of you just completing your poll, I'm just gonna leave it up for just a few seconds more so that you can see Andrea's screen clearly.
Can you guys see it now?
Yes, it's perfect. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay. So who is the district railroad coordinator, also known as the DRC? So the district railroad coordinator is the railroad main point of contact on all projects. So if the locals have a project, please contact the district DRC. We have every district has a DRC in the office. The railroads know who each district DRC is. They work with us on all projects, so they are very familiar with the district DRCs, and they're very familiar with the headquarters and railroads. So the DRC is responsible for clearing all railroad involvement on a project. So in order for a project to make certification, we have to coordinate and ensure that all road agreements, the plans have all been approved. So some typical road agreements that we enter into on projects are right-of-way agreements. This is where we're paying them to review project plans, sometimes flagging, but now a lot of the railroads are contracting that work out. So a lot of that is going into phase 4 with the contractor, unless it's during phase 9. Construction and maintenance agreements, that's when the crossing is being significantly changed or we're actually altering some of the railroad's facilities. Some other agreements are right of entries, wireline permits, and then also if it applies, the California Public Utilities Commission also has to be invited and included to railroad meetings, and they also have to give their approval and authorization for railroad work. So what defines railroad involvement? The most commonly one known is if you're going to be within 25 feet of the railroad center line, over or under the railroad's corridors. So the railroads consider anyone in their area right of way without permission, that's considered fouling the track. So that's when a person or any item is in their railroad right of way. So they do not want us to be out in their right of way without their permission, and they want us to coordinate with them to ensure that no one's out there to the huge safety concern. And then recently, Caltrans, because of some projects where we did not coordinate because we thought our project was not even within 2 miles of railroad track, it's caused communication with like signalization. So we're actually, if we're going to be altering, closing down traffic, closing down the lanes, we're having those conversations with the railroads to make sure that we're coordinating with them so that we don't have cars queuing, which means that they're sitting on the track or very near to the track. And that's a huge safety concern for the railroad. And it should also be for Caltrans and locals as well. So here are some pictures of what's considered fouling the track. So it's like you see if there's equipment there and we don't have the railroad approval. The far right corner is showing an overpass, and you can see where from the bottom of the facility down into this area, this is the railroad's right of way. So if we're doing a project and we're saying all work is going to be totally within the locals right of way or the state's right of way, we need to still have those conversations with the railroad to make sure that we're not, during construction, nothing's going to be flying out over onto the railroad track because that's a big safety concern. So we need to make sure that our contractor is very aware of that. Whoever gets the project bid, they need to make sure that we are not putting any materials that flying off into the railroad, because then that may cause them to have to stop the train. And I don't know, for long periods of time. So we want to prevent any of that happening. So the 2-mile recommendation is because highway projects have negatively impacted the railroad traffic where proposed work was not properly vetted for impacts on the nearby railroad. So make sure that you guys are saying, okay, are we going to be closing down a traffic lane? Is this going to be causing more traffic to stop near a railroad track, even if it's a mile within the project? We need to make sure we're having those conversations with the railroad just to ensure that we're doing proper signage. We have flaggers out there if needed, because we don't want to have the traveling public stopping very close to the tracks, because that's a huge safety concern. So will construction affect the traffic count? Will construction affect the traffic speed? These are questions that you guys need to ask when you're looking at your project and you say, okay, the railroad's 2.5 miles away. Well, if we're going to be affecting traffic count, traffic speed, or traffic alignment, then we should at least have a conversation with the railroad and just show them our plans, and so that they can say, yes, we need a flagger out there, or no, what your guys' plans are showing, it's appropriate, shouldn't be any problems. So we are highly encouraging that. So here's where an actual project, this is why we created the 2-mile rule recommendation. Here at, I think it's Highway 118, we installed, this used to be a stop sign. Caltrans installed the signal lights thinking, okay, the railroad is more than a mile away, should be no problem. Well, once that signal light was installed, the cars started stopping closer to the tracks and near where the train could have an accident with the cars. So that's why we need to have the conversations with the railroads. And the railroad called us instantly and was like, why didn't you guys communicate with us about installing the traffic signal. What could have happened if we would have properly communicated with the railroad is we could have set up our communication systems with their communication system so that the lights would have went along when the train is coming, and it could have been coordinated. So there's simple things that can be done that can prevent safety issues or concerns such as this. And this will play the video.
Hey, Andrea, I don't know if there's audio on this video, but it's not coming through.
Oh, it's not playing?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I can hear it. What's wrong with that, Robert? How do I go?
Andrea, do you want to just give us a little voiceover?
Okay, I'll just actually go through. I'll let it play, but the whole point of this video is to show you guys that each of these railroad crossings, there's these 3 signs, and I don't know if anyone has ever noticed it in Utah railroad tracks, but they have these signs, and this number here, I think it's a 6-digit number with the alpha letter. That's the location, a determining location for the railroad. So if you have it, you stop near a railroad or you see someone having their car stopped or people actually walking close in the railroad's right of way, please call the 1-800 number and give them this number, and that tells them exactly the location of you. It's like a street address for the railroads, and all of the railroad tracks have these at their lights. So we just wanted to share that. I'm sorry the video is not playing for you guys, but it's a good video if you guys can go to. I think it's the FRA that puts on that video, but this is just a snippet of the information we wanted to share and make sure that everyone is very aware that if you stop at the railroad or near a railroad track and have an issue, this is how you would be able to contact the railroad's traffic. I think it's called their traffic room, and they can call and let the trains know, hey, we've got someone stopped on the tracks or nearby, like be aware, or even if they have to stop the train. And then here are just some top recommendations that we really want to encourage you guys to do in your project is identify railroad involvement early and talk to the district railroad coordinators. They can, if you guys are having problems with contacting a railroad, they can help you. Design your project based on the railroad guidelines. The railroad guidelines are AREMA, AREMA. And if you go onto Union Pacific's website, they have the AREMA, I think it's a manual there available, so you guys can go there and look up any type of situation that your project is doing and you want to see what the railroad recommends, then that's the quickest way of getting your project approved. CPUC also has to approve some design requirements if it is involving the public roadway. Ensure that your project has funding for railroad work activities. Make sure if Caltrans has to review an agreement, we want to see that the locals have the funding set aside to ensure we can pay the railroad for their work. We don't want to have them out there doing work and there's no money to pay them. Develop a reasonable schedule and allow time for resubmittals. Just let you guys know, the railroads do not have an expedite system in place. Everyone goes into the same mailbox. They don't have a separate mailbox for submitting projects for Caltrans. All of us go into the same mailbox. City projects, local projects, Caltrans projects, anyone doing a project that they need the railroad to review, we all go into the same mailbox. And so they go first comes, first served. So if They have to make comments on your plans and return them, and you take 5 weeks to respond to them. Your Just know that your project doesn't go back to the top of the stack. You go actually down to the bottom. So please be very aware when you're responding to items to make sure that you are responding in a timely manner so that you can keep your project on time. And then strongly do not do scope changes. Or if you do, please make sure that you're sharing that information with the railroad so that you guys can get their input on the scope change to ensure that it's not going to cause any further project delays, or it may cause another division to have to review the project plan. So please remember, railroads control the right-of-way with superior rights. They are the only agency across the country that has superior rights over Caltrans, a lot of locals. They were here before all of us. Their main focus is track safety. So if you've ever been in a project team meeting with them, that's all that they talk about. And it's very, very interesting because I wish I had this slide, but at a recent training that we have with the railroads, they showed us how important it is for them to keep the stabilization of their tracks. And you think like it's just dirt and rocks and then they lay the track. There's actually an engineering method to how they install or lay and compound all of that, because if you think about it, those trains are heavy. And then they've got all this additional items, or what are they called? I can't think of the word. But I want to say caboose, but there's another word for it. But all of those little cabooses behind them, that's a lot of weight. So it takes them over a mile to stop. So if someone is on the track and the train is honking at them and they don't get out in time, the train is going to take over a mile to stop for that individual, or if there's a car stuck on the train. So please, please make sure that you guys are having the conversations with the railroad. And if you guys are out there, please do not go into the railroads right away unless there's railroad representation. Except in absolute emergency situations, trains cannot be diverted. So that is. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have one in the chat.
Okay.
If maintenance work is being performed on a local program agency's bridge over over railroad, but the work is confined to work on the top of the bridge deck, is the railroad or the district railroad coordinator involvement necessary?
Yes, we should at least have that initial conversation with them just to double check that whatever the work is being done, it's not going to have any materials or anything flying into the roads right away. It could be a quick email, or Union Pacific has a system where you can send the plans into, but it depending on the railroad, it could be a quick email, send them their plans, give a very, very good description of what the work is entailing, and they could respond and say, hey, you guys are okay. You don't need to do anything with the railroad. I strongly, strongly encourage that, because I know a lot of us are always thinking, oh my God, the railroads are horrible. We don't want to work with them. Our project's going to be delayed by 2 to 3 years. That's not always the case. They really do not want our projects to interfere with their trains schedule, but they also really try to be good partners with us. And I think through the years, we've actually improving our relationship with them, because they see that we really are trying to be better about communicating with them. So strongly encourage everyone to communicate with the railroads, and don't think that it's always going to cause a delay for your project. It's not. As long as we communicate early with them, it's a huge, huge help for the project.
All right. Were there any more questions for Andrea and railroads?
No?
Nope, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, well, I'll see if I
So,
can send you guys the link for the video that unfortunately you guys couldn't hear the sound on. I'll try to send that the next couple of days to you guys, Robert. You guys can maybe share it to the attendees who signed in. But it's a good video.
okay.
Just tells you guys about the safety and to be aware of the railroad. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andrea.
I only made it through part of the questions. It looks like I have 3 more. So we can jump through some utility questions really quickly if we want. So Scott asked, a previous question was about the storm drain adjustments. Did you say it's considered a utility and needs to be included in the package? So yes. If the storm drain adjustments are usually a utility relocation, the relocation of storm drains themselves are typically considered part of drainage and are done with the work of the project. So usually in a project like that, you're doing the drainage anyway. But you'll have projects, especially overlays, where you're just going to do a grind and pave, and you need to drop the lids, and then you need to adjust them back up to grade. So in those situations, you would do those as a normal utility relocation. If you're doing overall, say that we're redoing the entire drainage system for that whole area. So we're putting in a 24-inch pipe. We're doing all the risers up to the manhole lid. So in that situation, all of that might be done as part of construction. So it's not necessarily a black and white answer. But typically, if it's just an adjustment, it would be a relocation. If you're relocating the whole facility, that would be done under drainage. But again, talk to your local assistance coordinator. So question 2, what is the process for Caltrans to review the utility and right-of-way forms for local projects if no encroachment permit is needed for federal funding was involved in the preliminary feasibility? So you need to be involved. You're not doing work. Well, so if you have a project that's off system and isn't touching Caltrans highway at all, highway or freeway, and there's no federal funding, we're not going to see it. We won't even know the project exists. Once there's federal funding on the project, then we get involved, because up until that point, you just have a local project. And because there's no federal funding on it, we don't even need to see it. The problem is anytime there's federal funding, period, and everyone's like, well, the color of money is different on my project. It isn't. I mean, it is, but in the way that we view it, federal funding is federal funding, because what happens is you get far enough down the road and you haven't ended up filling out the right packages because the color of money changes, or you get different colors of money. And then that's an issue. So, sorry. All right. So I believe that answered that one. We emailed our plans to our local contact. Should we upload the plans online also? I'm not sure, Mark, what specifically you're asking. So if you're, and I also don't know if you're the consultant or if you're the local agency. I'm guessing you're not the local. So typically, the way it should work is the local agency is the only one that should be communicating with Caltrans. Now, we don't mind if consultants work with us, but the local agency needs to be involved in every single email that comes to us. And the reason is because we don't have a project with the consultant. We have a project with the local agency, and the local agency needs to understand every aspect of that project, because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible. And I mean, let's just say that the project goes south and the feds do an audit. They don't care about the consultant. They care about the local agency. You know, they're the ones that it's their project. They were seeking federal funds, so they're the ones that have to be compliant. So they should.
Oh,
Sorry, Brian, for context, that was Mark actually sent that question in for Andrea. I don't know if it makes a difference, but just FYI.
there we go. Well, I can't speak on the railroad side, but
Ask your local programs liaison, and they should be able to inform you, and or have them ask their district railroad coordinator. They should be able to guide you of what steps you need to take.
see, look at that. Robbie's been listening.
I try.
All right. Let's go to the storm drain one because I want to get you guys moving on to the next stuff. Storm drains through, okay, so that's UPR property, that's railroad. And I really can't help with that one again. I've worked in utilities for almost 20 years and railroad scares me because utilities is hard enough. They just add a whole new level. We have a lot less flexibility with the railroad. So Andrea's the queen, and yeah, she holds down the fort for the railroad side.
Yeah. So once again, Christian, reach out to your local programs liaison, and they'll either help you or get you the answer that you need for this question.
Okay, and then so I did include my email in the chat for anyone that needed it. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about utilities.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it, man. All right. So moving on to our certification presentation. Steve Mattis will be taking that and running with it. All right, Steve, you're up.
Good morning, everybody. Can we hear me?
Very good.
Fantastic. And it looks like I'm displaying the proper part of the training.
Yep.
Robbie, you're my savior. All right.
Thanks.
So my name is Steve Mattis, and I work in Caltrans headquarters, right-of-way land surveys, and local programs. I've been with Caltrans for about 24 years. Seen some things. All the best things happen next to our highways and roadways. What I'm going to be presenting on today and what we have been leading up to for this whole class is right-of-way certifications, the bread and butter of clearing your project's right-of-way. I shouldn't have to go into too much detail because we've had some really great presenters, and the facets that they've been talking about, the topics they've been talking about, all lead to a properly cleared right-of-way and a certification that supports a request for authorization and your project's construction. So let's talk about the right-of-way certification and exactly what it is. You know, it's required as part of the Code of Federal Regulation. FHWA directs us to make sure we get certifications for federally funded projects. It is that written statement summarizing the status of all right-of-way related to matters pertaining to proposed federal aid construction project. The purpose of the right-of-way certification is to document the right-of-way for construction project is ready for advertising and states real property interests have been or are being secured, depending on the type of right-of-way certification, the level that you're seeking there. Physical obstructions, including utilities and railroads, have been or will be removed, relocated, or protected as required for construction, operation, maintenance, and proposed project. You've heard those two topics both with Brian Goldman and Andrea for utilities and railroad. And then finally, right-of-way acquisition and relocation assistance program requirements were conducted in accordance with Uniform Act, applicable federal and state laws and procedures. And that you covered early this morning with Megan Van Alstine and with relocation assistance. So let's see. All right. So continuing on, what is right-of-way certification? A right-of-way certification required for any project that has a PS&E package. It's that part that gets you to construction. It gets you to that point where you can request that authorization. It gets you to that point where you need money for your project construction, which typically is the more expensive part of a project. A right-of-way certification is needed to get federal reimbursement. I'm sure your agency has worked with local assistance and has ad nauseam tried to make sure that they've done everything possible so that their milestones are reached when requesting that request for authorization for that particular milestone. Certification is also included or needed for emergency reopening projects, ER projects, and construction can't begin without a right-of-way certification. But in some cases, it will for those ER projects. But at the end, when you're asking for that federal reimbursement, you need that right-of-way certification. So we're going to also talk about the levels of right-of-way certification. So the cleanest right-of-way certification would be a level 1. You can have a level 1 certification or a no right-of-way certification when there's no right-of-way. Or you can have a perfect level 1 certification when you have full legal and physical possession of all parcels, fee interest, easements, temporary construction easements. Those are all part of that level 1 certification. A level 1 certification allows you to advertise and award for that construction contract. Oh boy, I apologize. I jumped ahead to the next slide and just told you about level 1 certification. All right. So again, with the level of right-of-way certification, a right-of-way certification states that the properties needed for construction of the project have been obtained. They are clear of any utilities and structures which may be moved, plus the persons and business displaced by the project have been relocated. Again, that's clearance, it's relocation assistance. In some limited circumstances, the agency may proceed with the advertising for construction bids prior to the elements of the certification being completed. If it will not adversely affect any owners, occupants, and not impede construction contractors. We'll talk about that a little later with certification 3 and 3W. I already touched on the certification 1, but there are 4 levels of certification. They include level 1, 2, a conditional level 3, and that level 3 with a workaround. And again, yeah, it depends on the use of the level of certification, reflective of the status of property rights, relocation, and displaced persons. All right, back to level 1. So as we said, this is the cleanest level of right-of-way certification. You could have a scenario where there is no right-of-way needed for your project, but because FHWA requires it, you need to provide a statement stating that there is no right-of-way. It's the easiest one to obtain and review for us in local programs. Another level 1 certification scenario is that you've acquired legal and physical possession of all right-of-way. In this scenario, you're talking about acquisitions are complete, escrows are closed, payments been made, very important. Final orders of condemnation are recorded, orders of possession served and effective. All occupants have vacated. Sometimes we miss that timeline. Relocation assistance requirements have been met. Improvement structures have been removed, salvaged, or demolished. And then, like what Andrea and Brian were discussing earlier, utility railroad work has been completed or arrangements have been made for the work to be completed. And all these certifications are part of the Code of Federal Regulations under Title 23, subpart C in Section 635. Okay, so let's talk about a level 2 certification. In this scenario, your project has physical possession of that right of way. It may not have the legal rights, but at least has that physical possession of that property. For example, right of entries would satisfy that, and securing possession and use agreements. Typically, right of entries are withheld for those ER projects. It's the same as a level 1 certification. You can advertise and award the project, so they essentially do the same thing. They're a little trickier because you have to make sure you keep track of those dates of any temporary construction easements or time-sensitive right-of-way interests. Okay, so on to certification 3, that conditional certification 3. These are a little tricky and not used very often because they don't do a lot to move your project forward to construction. Typically, you see a conditional certification 3 utilized when you're trying to protect funds, but you know that construction is going to occur at a much later date. You'll need a resolution of necessity when you're utilizing a conditional 3 certification. However, orders of possessions, hearings, and service dates may not be effective. So you may have a situation where you have a RON, but the dates for that RON are not effective. You can advertise a Cert 3 for construction contract, but that's about it. You can't open the bid packages. You can't, or you shouldn't award any contracts until the Cert 3 has been updated to a Cert level 1 or 2. A memorandum of justification, so this applies to both the 3 and 3W, must be submitted with right-of-way certification with a full justification as to why the conditional 3 is needed, why it's prudent to use that. You'll find that the conditional certification 3 needs headquarters support as well as FHWA approval. So due to these complexities, the right-of-way certification level 3, these requirements require a little bit of time, which sometimes a project doesn't have. So they're limited in use. All right. One other thing I wanted to mention is Cert 3s require 15 days prior to bid opening that they be upgraded. So that should be noted. And when you are applying for a conditional level 3 certification, you're going to want to write a memorandum to, or you're going to write a letter of support to your district so they can support and route that request for the use of a conditional level 3 to headquarters and eventually to FHWA for their approval. Okay, so let's talk about right-of-way certification level 3 with a workaround. These also should be utilized sparingly. You'll have a scenario where you may have a RON for your project on the parcel. And this has to do with getting that approval through your board of supervisors if you're a county or a city council. In a certification 3W, orders, possessions, hearing, service dates may not be effective yet, but you still have that RON. Again, extraordinary circumstances they should only be used in. Memorandum of justification is required, just as a request for a conditional 3 to your district coordinator. You can advertise and award the construction contract. Bid must be identified workaround parcels. So that's the advantage of a Cert 3W. You can get to construction. You can denote in your bid package those parcels you don't have the rights to, and the contractor can begin work but avoid those parcels that haven't been cleared yet. So while the certification isn't required to be upgraded to number 1 or 2, it must be updated a minimum of 15 days prior to the bid opening. All right, let's discuss some of the forms and some of the things that you might encounter when you're completing a right-of-way certification. In my past experience, I've seen where in local programs, the bulk of projects delivered are off the state's highway system. So for many of you, for many of the agencies, you'll be focusing on the off-system projects and forms that are developed through the LAPM, Local Assistance Procedure Manual. You're probably familiar with the 13A and 13B right-of-way certifications. The 13A can be used when all construction activities take place when there are no acquisition or property rights, no occupant is displaced, no utility relocations except for adjusting manhole or box covers to a new grade, and there are no railroad involvement. This is kind of that similar to that no right-of-way statement, or it is actually that no right-of-way statement that I talked about earlier, where FHWA requires you to at least make that statement. So that's where you utilize a 13A exhibit. Let's see. It's also sometimes called the short form. Pretty much, if you check yes on any of the boxes and utilizing that 13A, you probably should be utilizing the 13B form for your project certification. And so then, if you have right of way that needs to be cleared and it's off system, you'll be utilizing the 13B exhibit. And we'll discuss that a little more later on. And then finally, if your project impacts the state's highway system, you'll be utilizing the exhibit from the Caltrans right-of-way manual versus the LAPM. And specifically, you'll be utilizing the 17EX18 certification form. All right. Additional information that you might need toward the right-of-way certification. You're going to want to allow your local or your district coordinator time to review that right-of-way certification and those deliverables that you secured. To ensure compliance with state and federal guidelines, we request backup data be submitted prior to approving the cert. These include contracts, order of possessions, notice to owner, utility agreements, encroachment permit, application, bid estimates, etc. These are things that all need to be executed. They can't be open. They can't be open-ended and in the future unless we're going the route of a cert 3 or 3W. And if requesting a cert 3 or 3W, there should be minimal interests that are outstanding. It shouldn't be your entire project that has projects that are parcels that need to be acquired. Things to note, all forms need to be available in your office should FHWA or Caltrans make a visit to your office. So you got to keep that file retention going. Please use our most current forms that can be found on the internet, local assistance. These forms are approved. They're a living document that changes, so it behooves the agency to keep up to date with their content. With these certifications, I think I touched on this earlier. City and county board of supervisors, they are officially the only two entities that can sign off on a certification, unless they approve some type of resolution that delegates that ability to sign off on certifications. We need a copy of that every time your project is requesting certification on a project that's interested in utilizing federal funds. With the resolutions, typically they are not assigned to a person. They are typically assigned to a position at your agency. For example, public works director, city engineer, real estate manager, etc. To note, right-of-way certification is needed, as you probably know, for your DLAE, so that they can process requests for authorization of construction funds. And as Brian spoke about earlier, specific authorizations that Exhibit 14C for off-system projects need to accompany the right-of-way certification. All right, let's discuss right-of-way certification time considerations. More specifically, when requesting a conditional 3 or 3W certification, we do need a little bit of time to turn around for a regular level 1 or level 2 certification. But an example would be, so Caltrans, we back into our timelines to prioritize our work. Bare land versus occupied, business versus residential, probable versus condemnation or not. If you're acquiring a residence or business, you need to factor in when the title company will record those deeds. Okay, that'll impact the level of certification that you'll request. You'll need to account for that, most people cannot relocate until they have money in hand. So if that is being held up, you need to work that into the timeline for certification to make sure that everybody's received payment, or at least the payment is available. You need to factor in relocation. You need to factor in an account for the 90-day notice. Megan touched on that, to vacate. Until the agency has that property interest and it's secured and they can go in there and actually utilize it, you don't have that certification, or potentially you don't have that certification that you're looking for. If your project is going through the condemnation process, the project will need to account for time that it takes to secure a resolution of necessity, that RON, from your Board of Supervisors or the City Council. That can take time. It can be delayed if your property owner requests an appearance. So your property owner has the right to appear before that board or that city council to discuss the project. For Caltrans, you need to account for serving and recording initial suit papers, including time for summons and complaint. Caltrans, we typically factor in about 9 months before the service of the notice deposit and service of the order of possession to obtain that order of possession. After that, you can count on the settlement may not occur until another 12 to 18 months, depending on trial and any stipulated judgments. What might be helpful is early on in your project development and towards your certification, making sure that those public hearings, that investment that you're making with the public on developing that project, you may see cues that identify future condemnation. Okay, so you might keep in mind that if a grantor or potential grantor shows up and they're really adamant about the disdain they have for the project, they might be an interest for a later condemnation. But you have to work with them and make sure that you understand and answer their concerns. Let's see. When sending a certification in for Caltrans review, always scan a draft of that certification to us. Get it to us as soon as possible so that we can lay eyes on it. And if we see any inconsistencies, work with the agency to correct them. So I think we touched on this earlier with FHWA. It's kind of strange times we're working in. And in a perfect world, we usually have a 30-day turnaround when we receive that request for a Cert 3 or conditional Cert 3 and a 3W, and then we factor it and review it and send it off to FHWA for their approval. So also work with your local coordinator to get that information to us if you feel that we do need to bring in FHWA for those conditional 3s and 3Ws. And so let's discuss updating that certification. In a perfect world, we secure that certification, we request for authorization, we go to construction, and boy, that certification is good. There are situations though where I would say funding may hold up your project, and you may need to reevaluate or update that right-of-way certification after a year. And the reason we ask or we require that is temporary construction easements, just to verify project scope hasn't changed, significantly that impacts right of way. So after a year, if you haven't gone to construction, let's make sure that we are updating those right of way certifications so that they're fresh and still valid for your project. Again, if your project secures a conditional 3 or 3W, you'll want to definitely update the conditional 3. And then you also want to take into consideration the 15 days prior to bid opening. I think that's it. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions that I didn't answer in the presentation? Have I put everybody to sleep?
I don't think so. As we're waiting for questions, potential questions, just a reminder that there was a handout regarding certifications with kind of bullet points for each level of certifications. So that will be a good reference to look back on and see what to go along with what Steve was talking about.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yep. All right. Oh, there we go. All right. Question: what level of certification is applicable to engineers putting together a 13A/B forms where no acquisition is necessary?
Sure. I apologize that I didn't explain that more thoroughly. Level 1, if you're using a 13A, you've got a project that is a level 1 certification. There's no scenario where you should even see level 2 or 3 for a 13A.
All right. Any more questions for Steve? Oh, you mentioned we had to keep our files available in our office. Can those be digital files or do they have to be paper files?
Boy, if they're not digital, I'm gonna be so mad because if anything good came out of COVID was a lot of approval for digitizing documents. I'm leaning toward that, but I'm gonna ask, is my coworker Jennifer in the meeting? I'm pretty sure I'm pretty certain that if you keep digitized records, we're okay with that.
Yes. Yeah, we are
Yay.
now, there is no requirement to have hard copy paper records. So we keep digital records here in Caltrans and it's available to the locals as well.
Yeah, good question. Good question. We don't need to go 1999 on this. Unless it's a party.
All right, another question here. How long does it typically take for advanced review of the exhibit 13B?
So I don't think I touched on real-time review of right-of-way deliverables. We asked the local agencies to provide drafts of their documents as their right-of-way milestone as they go through that and they develop their right-of-way clearance. If we've laid eyes on these draft agreements and they're looking great, and then the agency is subsequently going out and executing these documents, and then we get to a point where the agency is requesting right-of-way certification of their project. It should be pretty quick. I don't want to speak for any specific district on their turnaround time, but leading up to that request for right-of-way certification, it should go pretty quickly on the review. If we've already laid eyes on the draft documents and there's no inconsistencies, all the documents are executed. The right-of-way certification has all the pertinent information with dates that are correct and pertinent. We tend to get in trouble with that with temporary construction easements and utility notices. So be careful and mindful. Really make sure you're working with utilities because those dates are hard set and they've got to match. They've got to match all the notices and the information and the documents that you're trying to get a utility, a cleared utility package on. So they've got to reflect those dates and be utilized in the right-of-way certification. Did that answer the question?
And just to add, it's not necessarily the form that you're using, it's the level of certification. So just as a reminder again, that if you're at a level 3 or 3 W, 3 with a workaround. That requires a longer turnaround time because it's not just your district liaison that is going to be accepting that certification. Those are required to go to FHWA. And in order to go to FHWA, it has to go from the district up to headquarters for approval. And then from headquarters, we send it to FHWA. Generally, a level 3 or 3W is probably about 45 days. So make sure, like Steve mentioned, definitely utilize your local agency representative to have them look at drafts for you so that by the time you are ready to finalize that document, all of the questions have been asked, because we are more than willing to look at draft documents, provided it's not too early that it's really, there's more questions than answers on it. But level 3s are going to take longer.
Absolutely. Good points, Jennifer. FHWA has just been gutted. They're receiving so much information and so few people have eyes to look at our requests. They've asked us to actually bundle up our requests from headquarters to them just because of their staffing levels. So hopefully that'll all get worked out and we'll get the turnaround time down a little bit. But for right now, I think I said 30 days in my lecture, but yeah, 45 days is definitely a realistic, but it's just taking time. By the time you submit that support information to your LPC, they have a time to look at it. They send it to headquarters, and then headquarters, we're pretty quick about the turnaround and support because the eyes have already been laid on it. But then getting that certification to FHWA and having them look at it and put their blessing toward it takes a little time as well. Great question.
All right, we have another question. Can a draft right-of-way cert be sent to Caltrans for review ahead of NEPA CEQA or categorical exemption for no right-of-way or utility relocations? Oh, for no right-of-way utility relocations necessary. If so, how far in advance and how long will it take to approve once the draft has been reviewed and NEPA CEQA have been approved?
I will say, if I was working in the district, that this certification would go to the bottom of my stack. I'm not going to invest a lot of time looking at a draft certification for a project that hasn't even cleared environmental. Where's the PSNE also? So yes, I mean, they could look at it. You certainly want to be talking to your district liaison from the get-go. As soon as you know you have a project, your district liaison is somebody that you should be engaging with frequently. But it's going to be up to them to determine if they're going to look at this for you or if they're going to put it on hold. But it really is too early for right-of-way to be reviewing a cert prior to environmental, because we have nothing to really back up that this is your project. This is what's been environmentally cleared. So I would say the majority of the districts, they may look at it, but majority will also have to put this on the back burner, because as a reminder, our district staff is busy and all of you, they're working on multiple projects with multiple agencies, concurrently. So they're going to have to prioritize what is higher priority work versus lower.
Yeah, to add to that, Jennifer, that's spot on. When I was in the district, inevitably toward the end of the fiscal year, all of us need that federal money. So we're really pushing to get those certifications through. Especially toward the end of the fiscal year, your local program coordinator is going to be swamped. And if you submit a draft along with all these other projects and agencies submitting their requests, it's going to be tough for them to review it in a timely manner. They'll get to it, but it's definitely going to be prioritized. Good point.
All right. Any more questions for Steve? All right. I'm seeing none. So you're off the hook now, Steve.
Woo. Well, thank you for listening to me. I hope you have a great remainder of your class here and great day. So thanks again.
All right, let me go ahead and share. All right, we've come to the end of the Federal Aid Series training. I appreciate, first of all, I just want to say I appreciate all the presenters for both days, doing a wonderful job. Great work, everybody. And I appreciate all the questions and the attendance from all you guys as well. So with that being said, one of the main themes you may have heard throughout the training is, documentation and record retention. And we just really want to hammer that home because, we want to see good documentation that is reflecting the federal regulations and the policy and procedures that are required for these federal aid projects. We don't want any agencies to potentially lose funding in the future for projects. So that's why, we urge you to be in contact with the LPC, as soon as you can to get them on board and get them familiar with the project, and so that you guys can use us. That I apologize for my dog. That you guys can use us as a resource, and we can help you along the way. So another piece of documentation that is important are diaries. So as diaries are an important tool to show the right-of-way compliant process, diaries document the actions taken and should be written so that a third party reviewing the diary at a later date has a good understanding of what was undertaken, when, and with whom. So, oops, sorry about that. As I mentioned earlier, and I think it was mentioned earlier as well, both Caltrans and the Federal Highway Association have the right to review your files for compliance. So that's why good documentation and reaching out early to your LPC, to your utility coordinator, to get them familiar with the project and them helping you stay compliant. Because normally final vouchering, happens after project completion. So you say about 3 years after the project has been completed to keep your records. It could be more for us to come and ask for reviews. So it's always good just to keep everything digital, which is a great, way to store things nowadays. Less space taken than physical. Just keep those stored in a safe place, because you never know when or who will become knocking to review those. Other required documents are diaries for parcels. So individual diaries for each parcel, making sure you guys document every action with that parcel. Utility files, as Brian mentioned earlier, having the notice, the complete utility package, even, potential diaries for the back and forth between you and utility owners could be important. And then basically any other documentations or notes that have come up throughout the project's life. Basically kind of just keep everything all so that in one spot, so nothing gets out of place. And then if something comes up, you can always go back and retrieve it. All right. So where do you go for more information? So we do have the right-of-way local programs website. This is a hyperlink. However, it is broken. So I am going to post the link to the website in the chat if you want it to open it up, bookmark it, and whatnot. but the Caltrans local assistance website link is available. And here you'll find manuals, forms, your district contacts. But however, that's, as the bottom here says, that was provided as a handout as well. All right, with that being said, we have questions. Will these FAQs be provided? I believe you're asking about the questions and answers that were answered throughout the course of the presentation. They will not be. And then the next question, how long does the LPA find out the project final voucher date? Is there a website? That I am not familiar with. Steve, Jen,
yeah, I was going to say the money aspect falls under Department of Local Assistance, your DLAE, local assistance engineer. So your that person is your contact, and since the money runs through that office, you should probably ask that question to them.
Thanks, Jen. And then will the session recording be available? I forgot to mention it this morning, but I did mention it yesterday. The recording for this training will not be available. This will be for internal use only. So I do apologize if you were looking to get this and have review back on it. Just because with the landscape consistently changing, we don't want to have a video out there saying old information. So that's why it will not be published. All right. I believe we still have Brian and Megan here. Any more questions? And I'll see the rest of the local programs headquarters team. Any questions that you weren't able to send? Feel free to send now or not. You guys can have a good rest of your day and get some time back. How about the certificate of completion?
I'm not sure what they mean by the certificate of completion.
I think they mean completion of this class.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. There will be no certificate for this class. However, that does remind me for Caltrans folks that are in here, there is a charging code that you can put into your timesheet. I will be sending in the chat right now. It's kind of weird, but you should understand where the information gets inputted.
And just to follow up on the certificate of completions, we used to hand those out when they were in-person classes only, but for virtual classes, there is no certificate of completion.
And Robbie, I just wanted to pop in and say thank you to you and Jennifer, Steve, Brian, Megan, everyone who presented here today. And Andrea, thank you very much. Did a great job, lots of good information and lots of good questions from the participants too. Thank you as well, all the participants. So just wanted to say thanks and nice job.
Thanks. We did get a question for Brian in the chat. Does the local assistants have to use the utility agreement from the LAPM?
No, they can use the utility agreement from the right-of-way manual chapter 13 if they'd like to. So you have to use the forms. If there's federal funding on the project, you have to use at least the LAPM, but if it's on system, you'd use the Caltrans forms. You cannot just use your own random agreements. And the reason is that the agreements that we have in our manuals have gone through checks with FHWA. They've gone through Caltrans legal. They're shown to meet the legal requirements in order to be compliant. And so when local agencies decides they're going to use their own agreements, it doesn't necessarily protect the state, the local agency, or the utility company. And therefore, it's not an acceptable way to move forward. It should always be the standard utility agreement with very minor changes. And any of those changes, like I said, would need to be go through a legal review. Which I will say right now is not worth it. Go with the standard clauses, because otherwise you're gonna you're gonna push your schedule out. And we don't mind doing that, but we can't elevate your project and escalate things to make it happen faster just because your project's getting close to losing funding. So we hear that a lot.
I think we try to, so answering one of the questions in the chat, I think we try to do this class twice a year at a minimum. And so that's when you can expect to have this offered again, check with local assistance and check for any of the publications.
Most of what's being shared in this class should not change from this class to the next, though. Mainly because we're just going over the general rules when it comes to locals. Not that there aren't going to be any changes, but we're basically doing the general idea of each of these functions. So yeah, there will be updates like with Buy America, but you're talking about maybe a slide or two here or there.
Yeah, we did have one, Brian, and that was with the authorization for the CERT 3 and 3W. That has since been retracted, the delegation from headquarters for off-system projects. So occasionally we do.
And I believe a lot of those major updates are sent out to the locals and consultants throughout the year and are available online as well. So those would be good resources to see when there are changes in process.
I also just threw in the chat the link to the local assistance blog. So when trainings get announced, they will pop up here. So it's a good idea to bookmark this website. And then I do believe they have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. So it's a good idea to save this website to see when future trainings will be available. All right. And yes, thanks, Scott. CalTap.org is another location that will have trainings that you can sign up to be notified about as well. All right. Is there any more questions? All right, not seeing anything. All right. Well, thank you all for those who are remaining in the meeting. Thanks you for attending. We appreciate it. Great turnout. And once again, thank you to the presenters. Couldn't have done this literally without you. So